A clear example of how subversive the activities of RILC are is the brief given by them to the UN Commissioner for Refugees, alleging that Australia's arrangements with other countries aimed at intercepting boat people, quote, may place Australia in breach of its obligations under international human rights law and also endanger asylum seekers and refugees, unquote. Also, this appeal to the United Nations was to an institution founded substantially under communist influence and patronage with a Marxist culture, substantially comprising totalitarian and corrupt third world countries. Furthermore, the UN has evidently or apparently been guilty of atrocious and often selective behaviour in relation to, quote, peacekeeping, unquote, operations, is determined to denude relatively prosperous countries like Australia of their hard-won higher standard of living and is single-mindedly shepherding the world towards authoritarian world government. The complicity of Australia's politicians in treaties and arrangements with the UN, particularly the 1992 Earth Summit's Agenda 21, which is a strategy for authoritarian world government using environmentalism, and which is being covertly applied across Australia by both major parties and local government, is appalling. I now make a small digression in an article entitled Howard Rebukes Abbott Over Fairness in the Sydney Morning Herald dated 5th of June 2014 at page 8, a joint press club address by Messrs Bob Hawke and John Howard was reported, with Mr Howard stating inter alia approximately as follows, quote, one thing I've learnt about politics, Australians fundamentally don't like zealots, fanatics. They get very suspicious of fanatics. It's part of our deep Celtic scepticism, and long may we remain suspicious of fanatics. The Australian people will respond to an argument for change and reform, but they want two requirements. They want to be satisfied it's in the national interest because they have a deep sense of nationalism and patriotism. They also want to be satisfied it's fundamentally fair, unquote. Now first, these statements have the appearance of being the typical cunning populism of the professional career politician, a blatant appeal to the voting masses. I, for one, am partly Celtic, and I must say that my modicum of scepticism is essentially directed at the career politicians of both major parties who have ruined the Australian economy and endangered our country strategically during the last 41 years since 1973. Moreover, Australia is going to need zealots and fanatics in the coming years if Australia is to survive in Asia, with zealotry and fanaticism directed to the defence and security of our country, underpinned by a hard-headed state of mind rather than the soft-headed, vacuous mentality which presently prevails. Second, as regards Australians concerned with the national interest and their sense of nationalism and patriotism, quote unquote, on the contrary, I would say that this is under strain. I would submit that to begin with, because of the racial, economic and social history of Britain, with its class system, the bitterness engendered by the pioneering Industrial Revolution, the fragmented pluralism of the developing British democracy, together with institutionalised adversary process as safeguards for that democracy, all inherited by the Australian colonies, the admixture of Australian colonial rebelliousness, egalitarianism and individualism, and the effects of distance and remoteness, a preoccupation with individual interest and class conflict compared with the ethnic of community loyalty. This proclivity was later counteracted by wartime experiences and needs in times of great national danger. Then in more recent years, with the effects of increasing and increasingly diverse immigration to Australia, pressures for state-sponsored institutionalised multiculturalism and additional revolutionary pressures from left-wing socialist and Marxist forces, the country has struggled to retain its identity. Mr Howard's statements in this regard therefore appear to be self-serving overstatements. So who are these zealots and fanatics that Mr. Howard is alluding to? Surely they can't be Messrs. Tony Abbott, Joe Hockey and Scott Morrison, for example. Not only have these men shown themselves to be supremely competent in their parliamentary roles, but they have risked their political careers and personal welfare in order to protect the nation and its economy. Who else could they be? Mr. Howard has not acted as a statesman in a number of matters. He has meekly acquiesced in the machinations of the United Nations, as all our politicians have done, particularly in his facilitative role with regard to the adoption and covert application throughout Australia of the UN's Agenda 21, which threatens Australia's sovereignty. Again, he was far too close to George Bush, a highly suspect figure, in his view of his role with regard to 9/11 and the American interference in Iraq, with exploitive control of its economy, and as a result engineered a free trade agreement with OSFA with the US, which is very disadvantageous to Australia, as well as purchasing the very troubled and exorbitantly expensive F-35 Lightning II Joint Strike Fighters, which are subject to formidable scientific criticism and opposition. In fact, apparently lemons. And he hung on to the leadership of the Liberal Party when it was apparent that he should have handed it over to a successor, subsequently losing the 2007 federal election and his own seat to Labor, although admittedly constricted by effectively a gerrymander. His mistake in following the neoliberalism or economic rationalism of the preceding Labor governments goes without saying. He followed in lockstep, as Professor David Flint puts it in his new book, Give Us Back Our Country. However, despite these failings in statesmanship, it must never be forgotten that Mr. Howard, together with Mr. Peter Costello, bestowed upon Australia an 11-year period of sustained economic growth and prosperity, including fiscal and budgetary rectitude and liquidation of the previous Labor government's accumulated huge debts. In addition, he saved the country from economic ruin and a collapse of security and sovereignty by stopping the escalating influx of illegal immigrants through his Pacific solution. And perhaps most laudable of all, he courageously defended the country's inherited attributes of Western civilization, its values and culture, against the rising tide of permissiveness and decadence allied with Marxism and political correctness engulfing our country and way of life and the Western world as a whole. Incidentally, for those who wish to learn about the forces behind and actually responsible for the attacks on the Twin Towers in New York and how it was done, I would encourage the reading of Christopher Bolin's two books, which are the ultimate books on this catastrophe. Those books are Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World, and Solving 9/11, The Original Articles. For photographs and descriptions of persons alleged to have been involved in the alleged conspiracy, see Google the website www.2/v/Israel _911.html. Were the same forces involved in the disappearance of the Malaysian airliner MH370? Reference might be made in this regard to the websites www.rensi.com/general 96/MH370RV.html and www.politics/politics2014/03/Rothschild-takes-down-Malaysian-airliner- etc.